The temperature here is 31 degrees Celsius. I know because I check the little app on my phone every morning, the same way I used to check the weather in Dayton before deciding whether to wear a coat to work. But here, there are no coats. There is just the fan spinning above the rattan chair on my terrace, the smell of garlic and vinegar drifting up from the kitchen 2 floors below, and a cup of Salabat. That's ginger tea, warming both my hands while the sky over Bacolod turns the color of a ripe mango. I pay $340 a month for this apartment. $340. I want you to really sit with that number for a second, because I know what you're thinking. I thought the same thing. I am 68 years old. My name is Carol Ann Whitfield. People who know me call me Carol. People who want something from me call me Mrs. Whitfield. And for 3 months in late 2022, a man named Dennis Arsenis called me Ma, which is the most complicated thing anyone has ever called me in my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to a Tuesday in March of 2023, because that's the morning everything broke open. Not broke in the dramatic way you might imagine. No screaming, no thrown plates, no slamming doors. It broke the way ice breaks in spring, quietly, in a place you weren't watching, and then all at once you're standing in water up to your knees wondering when it started. I was sitting in the waiting room of a neurologist's office in Dayton, Ohio. The carpet was the color of old mustard. There was a brochure on the table next to me, one of those glossy trifold things, and it said, in cheerful blue letters, Planning Ahead, Memory Care Communities in the Miami Valley Area. The name of the facility was circled in blue ink. My husband's handwriting. My husband. Gary Whitfield. 69 years old. A man I had shared a bed with for 41 years. A man I had driven to his own cardiologist appointments and picked up from knee surgery and held a cold compress against during 3 migraines that I remember more vividly than any anniversary dinner we ever had. That brochure was not on the table when I sat down. Gary had placed it there when he got up to use the restroom. He didn't know I'd seen him do it. He didn't know that I'd been watching, had been watching for a long time by then, in the particular way a woman learns to watch when something in her house has shifted, and she doesn't yet have words for what it is. I picked up that brochure. I read the circled address. And I made a decision, right there, in that mustard-yellow waiting room, before my name was ever called, before any doctor said a single word to me. I was not going to let this happen. You need to understand Dayton, Ohio, to understand me. Not the Dayton of history books or aviation museums. I mean the Dayton of Linden Avenue in the 1980s, where you shoveled your neighbor's walk without being asked, and the elementary school was 4 blocks from every house on the block, and the smell of a Frisch's Big Boy on a Friday night felt genuinely like abundance. I grew up in Springfield, a half-hour east, and moved to Dayton after marrying Gary in 1982. I was 27. He was 28. He sold insurance. I had just finished my LPN licensure and taken a job at Westwood Elementary as a school nurse. It was supposed to be a stepping stone. I had plans to go back for my RN. But then our son Philip came along in 1985, and our daughter Renata in 1988, and the stepping stone became the floor, and the floor became a life. And I don't say that with regret, because I mean it with all the complicated weight it deserves. I spent 31 years in that school. 31 years of bandaging scraped knees and calling parents, and keeping a tin of crackers on my desk for the kids who came in, saying their stomach hurt, when what they really meant was that nobody had packed them breakfast. I knew which children were being hurt at home from the way they flinched when I raised my hand to adjust the fluorescent light. I knew which ones were going to be okay. It's a particular kind of knowledge, nursing school kids. It lives in your hands more than your head. Gary and I want to be precise here, functional. We were a functional marriage for a long time. We had a shared language built from decades of small logistics. Who called the plumber? Who dealt with the insurance? Who remembered Renata's allergy to tree nuts when ordering at restaurants? We were not unhappy, exactly. We were two people who had grown into the shape of each other's routines so completely that neither of us had looked up in years. And then, 4 years ago, Gary retired from the insurance agency he'd worked at for 33 years. And everything I thought I understood about our equilibrium turned out to be dependent on one thing: distance. Time apart during the day. 8 hours where we each existed separately and came back together in the evening with enough friction of experience to make conversation. Without that, something curdled. I don't know another word for it. He became a man who filled the house with himself in a way that left no room for me. He reorganized my kitchen. He began commenting on how I drove. He referred to my reading glasses as the things you're always losing in front of Philip's kids. Small things. But small things, stacked high enough, become a wall. I retired at 63. By 65, I had begun to understand that what Gary wanted was not a wife but an auxiliary, someone to organize around his schedule, validate his opinions, require nothing that inconvenienced him. And when I started spending time on my own, taking a watercolor class at the community center, joining a book club, going to lunch with my friend Diane, he began to remark, in that low, even tone he used for serious things, that I seemed confused lately, that I was repeating myself, that he was a little worried. I was not confused. I was becoming myself again after a long absence, which must have looked the same to him. And then came the neurologist's waiting room, and the brochure, and the circled address in blue ink. And I understood. This was not worry. This was management. The woman's name was Patricia Okonkwo. She had been a 5th-grade teacher at Westwood until she retired 2 years before me, and I'd seen her maybe 4 times since. Once at a school reunion, once at the grocery store, once at Renata's baby shower, where we'd talked for 45 minutes about nothing and everything. She wasn't a close friend. She was the category of person I would describe as someone I'm always glad to see. I ran into her at a physical therapy waiting room in November of 2022, 4 months before the brochure incident, while I was there for a rotator cuff issue that had been annoying me since summer. Patricia was there for her hip. We sat together for an hour and 15 minutes, and in that hour and 15 minutes, Patricia Okonkwo changed the entire direction of my life, entirely by accident. She showed me photos on her phone. She had just come back from visiting her college roommate, a woman named Glenda who had moved to Bacolod, in the Philippines, 3 years earlier. The photos were of food, mostly. Plates of chicken inazel with the skin charred and gleaming. A bowl of something called KBL, Kadios, Baboy, Lanka, that Patricia described as the kind of soup that makes you feel like someone's grandmother loves you. There were photos of a wide boulevard with horse-drawn carriages, they call them tartanillas there, clip-clopping past tricycles in the evening heat. There was a photo of Glenda herself, sitting at a table outdoors, a San Miguel beer in her hand, laughing at something off-camera, and she looked, there is no other word, released. Like a woman who had put down something very heavy. She lives on $1,100 a month, Patricia said, as if this were a mildly interesting footnote. Says she's the happiest she's ever been. I didn't say much. I nodded. We talked about other things. My shoulder, her hip, the new principal at Westwood. And then I drove home, made Gary's dinner, and that night, after he'd gone to bed, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and typed, for the first time, Retiring to Bacolod, Philippines. I want to tell you what that search felt like. It felt like opening a window in a room you've lived in so long you'd stop noticing it had no air. I didn't tell anyone. Not Patricia, not Diane, not Renata, not Philip. For 4 months, I researched in private. Late nights after Gary fell asleep. Lunch breaks when he was out. Saturday mornings when he was watching his game. I read everything I could find. Expat forums, cost of living breakdowns, visa requirements, Bacolod-specific Facebook groups where Americans and Canadians and Australians posted photos of their grocery bills and their ocean views and their neighbors bringing them food. I read the cautionary posts too, about scams, about culture shock, about loneliness that could sneak up on you even in paradise. I read those carefully, and then Gary went to the restroom in a neurologist's waiting room and left a brochure with a circled address on the table next to me. And 4 months of quiet research became a plan. I told Philip first because I knew he would be the most rational of the two and I needed to practice. He was not rational. We were in his kitchen in Centerville, him and his wife Linda standing at the counter, me at the kitchen table with my hands around a mug of decaf. I had prepared what I wanted to say. I told him about Gary and the brochure. I told him I was not confused. I told him I had been researching Bacolod for 4 months. I told him I wanted to move. Philip put down his coffee cup. "Mom," he said, in the voice I recognized from when he was 16 and convinced I was being unreasonable. You can't move to the Philippines. You don't know anyone there." "I didn't know anyone in Dayton when I moved here at 27, I said. "That's completely different." "How?" He didn't answer that. What he said instead was, "What about your medications? What about health care? What if something happens to you?" Linda, who is a kind woman and knows it, added quietly, "We'd worry so much, Carol." The worry was real. I don't dismiss it. But worry and control are not the same thing, even when the person doing the worrying loves you, which Philip does. Renata was a different experience entirely. Renata called me on a Thursday evening after Philip had clearly called her first, and she was not in the mood for measured conversation. Renata has always been the one who leads with heat. "Dad says you're talking about moving to Asia," she said. No greeting. "I'm planning to move to Bacolod in the Philippines," I said. "Yes." "Mom, he needs you. Whatever is happening between you two, you can't abandon him." There it was. Abandon. "Your father," I said, and I kept my voice very even, brought a brochure for a memory care facility to my neurologist appointment, and left it where I would find it. I would like you to think about that for a moment before you use the word abandon again. Silence. Mom, are you sure that's what that was?" "I'm sure enough," I said. What Renata said next is something I've turned over many times since. She said, "But what will people think?" After 41 years. And I understood, in that moment, that Renata's objection wasn't really about me at all. It was about the story, the narrative of the Whitfield family. A mother who leaves doesn't fit the narrative. A mother who stays, even in a bad place, can at least be called devoted. "I love you both very much," I told her. "I'm not asking permission. I'm asking you to trust me." I booked my reconnaissance trip 2 weeks later. The flight from Dayton to Manila, with the layover in Tokyo, is approximately 22 hours of your life, leaving your body 1 seat cushion increment at a time. I flew economy because I wasn't yet sure this was real, and I didn't want to spend money on comfort for a trip that might convince me to turn around. My back ached by the time we reached the Pacific. My ankles swelled. I ate a microwaved chicken, something that tasted of nothing particular, watched 2 movies I'll never remember, and slept in 45-minute intervals with my neck pillow pushed so far to the left I woke up, convinced I'd done something permanent. From Manila, a domestic flight to Bacolod, 1 hour 20. And then we began our descent, and I looked out the window and saw green. So much green. Mountains. Sugar-cane fields stretching to the coast. And then the runway came up fast, and the wheels hit, and the plane erupted into spontaneous applause, which I would later learn is simply what happens on Philippine domestic flights, as natural as the seatbelt sign. The heat when I stepped out of the terminal was physical, not unpleasant. I want to be precise, but physical, the way a warm bath is physical. The air had weight and texture. It smelled of diesel and flowers and something fried from a nearby cart, and the sound was immediate and total. Horns, engine noise, someone calling out something in Ilonggo that I didn't understand but recognized as friendly from the tone. I had arranged to stay at a small guest house near the city center. The driver sent to pick me up, a man named Dodong, perhaps 55, with a laugh that came from somewhere genuinely pleased with the world, asked me as we pulled onto the main road, "First time Bacolod, ma'am?" "Yes," I said. "You will love it," he said, not as a pitch, but as a certainty. The way someone says the sky is blue. He pointed things out as we drove. The old Capitolina ruins, the Lizarra's mansion, a restaurant called A Boy's where, he informed me, the chicken in Azel was the best in the world, no exaggeration. He said this with complete seriousness, and I believed him. The guest house cost 800 Philippine pesos per night, roughly $32 at the exchange rate that week. My room was clean, tiled, had a ceiling fan and a small balcony facing a garden courtyard where a mango tree grew so close I could almost touch the fruit from where I stood. I sat on that balcony the first night with a bottle of cold Coke. I know, old habits, and I listened to the neighborhood settling into evening. Children playing somewhere nearby, a television through a window, a dog, distant, purposeful, roosters beginning their questionable relationship with the concept of bedtime. I did not feel like a stranger. That is the strangest thing I can tell you. I felt, for the first time in years, like someone had pressed pause on a noise I'd been living with so long I'd stopped hearing it, and in the quiet underneath, I could hear myself again. The next morning, Dodong took me to a palenque, a public market, where I spent 240 pesos, or about $4.25, on more fresh produce than I could carry. Tomatoes, kangkong greens, a bag of calamansi, a bunch of bananas, a papaya the size of a football. The vendor, a small woman named Aling Feely with silver streaks in her black hair, handed me a plastic bag and patted my arm and said, "You come back tomorrow, okay? I keep the good ones for you." I had been in Bacolod for 16 hours. I stayed for 3 weeks on that first trip. I did not spend 3 weeks eating in Azel and staring at the mountains, although I want to be clear that I did some of both and I regret nothing. The first week I spent gathering information the way I'd spent my entire nursing career gathering information, systematically without panic, from primary sources. I found a lawyer, a woman named Addie. Maritz Castillo referred to me by the expat Facebook group I'd been reading for months, who walked me through the SRRV, the Special Resident Retirees Visa. For Americans over 50 years old, the required deposit with the Philippine Retirement Authority is $10, placed in a Philippine bank, and it's refundable when you leave. In exchange, you get a visa with no expiration, no annual renewal, no checking in. You become, effectively, a permanent resident. Addie. Castillo was direct, thorough, and charged me 80 pesos for a 2-hour consultation. I left with 3 pages of notes, and my first sense that this was not only possible but manageable. The second thing I did was visit 2 hospitals. Corazon Loxon Montalbano Memorial Regional Hospital is the main public facility, and I went there not as a patient but with the eyes of a nurse. Clean? Staffed? Organized? The answer, to my professional surprise, was yes to all 3. I also visited a private clinic, Riverside Medical Center, where a consultation with a general practitioner cost 500 pesos or $9. Blood work. 1. 200 pesos. The doctor, a man perhaps 40, trained in Manila, spoke impeccable English and spent 40 minutes with me, which I assure you does not happen in Dayton without a 3-week wait and a $60 copay. In the second week, I looked at apartments. I had a specific number in my head. I wanted to keep my total monthly expenses under $1, 200, including rent, food, utilities, and transportation. I had a retirement income of $1, 840 per month between Social Security and my school district pension, enough to live modestly in Ohio, but in Bacolod it was comparative wealth. I found the apartment on the 3rd day of looking. It was on the 4th floor of a small residential building in Bacolod's Laxon Street area, walking distance from SM City Mall, 3 blocks from a palenque, and with a terrace that faced west, which meant sunset. 2 bedrooms, though I only needed 1. Air conditioning in the bedroom, ceiling fan in the living area. Monthly rent, 0 pesos. At the time, that was $320. It was there that I met Jerome. Jerome Evangelista was the building owner's nephew, 38 years old, who managed the property while running a small printing business on the ground floor. He had lived in the building for 12 years and had, over those years, become an informal welcome committee for the 2 or 3 foreign tenants who occasionally passed through. He showed me the apartment with the practiced efficiency of a man who has given the same tour many times but somehow still means it. Before I left, he said, "Miss Carroll, you are serious about this, yes? Not just tourism?" "I'm serious," I said. He nodded. "Then I will introduce you to a man named Ernie. He has been here, American from somewhere in Michigan, for 9 years. He will tell you the truth about everything. The good truth and the hard truth. You need both." Ernie Kowalczyk was from Kalamazoo. He was 71 years old, had moved to Bacolod after his wife passed, and his pension from 30 years in a GM parts plant turned out to be worth 3 times as much here as it was there. Don't be put off by it. It means they've decided you belong here. Once that happens, you'll find out what community actually means. I flew back to Dayton and spent 2 weeks getting my paperwork in order, opening a Philippine bank account remotely, and buying a second suitcase. I did not plan for Gary to find out the way he did. But then, some things choose their own timing. He was looking for his reading glasses on a Wednesday afternoon. They were on his head, as usual, but that is beside the point. And he came into the small room off the kitchen that I used for my projects, the room with the sewing machine and the stacks of books, and he opened the wrong drawer. In that drawer he found a copy of my SRRV application, a rental agreement for the apartment in Bacolod signed and stamped, a receipt for a storage unit I had rented under my own name, and a letter from Addie Castillo confirming the timeline for my visa deposit. He came into the living room holding those papers like they were evidence at a trial, which, in a way, they were. "What is this?" he said. Not a question. A statement. "That is my plan," I said. "I'm moving to Bacolod in the Philippines in 6 weeks." He stared at me. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "Carol, I need you here." And I said, "I know you do, Gary. That's not the same thing as me being happy." The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours. At various points he raised his voice. I did not raise mine. At various points he cited my age, my health, my mental state, and each time he said that last phrase, it landed between us like a cold, hard thing, because we both knew now exactly what that phrase had been doing in our marriage and why. I said, eventually, "You brought a brochure for a memory care facility to my neurologist. You circled the address. You were going to have me committed, Gary, and you dressed it up as worry." He didn't deny it. That told me everything the last 4 years hadn't yet confirmed. "I think we need to talk to a lawyer," he said. "I have one," I said. "Her name is Addie Gustillo. She's in Bacolod. I'll give you the number of a family attorney here for whatever else you need to sort out." Renata arrived 2 days later, having driven from Columbus, and the conversation we had at my kitchen table, the three of us, Gary present for the first 30 minutes before he left for the garage, was the hardest and most necessary conversation I have ever participated in. Renata cried. Gary slammed one door quietly on his way out. I was very calm. I had been preparing for this conversation in one form or another since November. "I don't recognize you," Renata said at one point. I told her, "that might be because you've been looking at me through your father's glasses." The movers came on a Tuesday in late April. The storage unit took most of what mattered. The rest stayed in the house. Gary's house now, legally in process, civilly if not yet finally. I packed 2 suitcases and a carry-on. I left a pot of soup in the fridge, which is perhaps a strange thing to do under the circumstances, but I am a woman who made soup for the sick children at Westwood Elementary for 31 years, and some reflexes do not dissolve just because your life cracks open. The first month in Bacolod was the most practical month of my life. I was too busy learning how to live to spend much time on anything else. Jerome, true to his word, made it his personal project to introduce me to every person in a 3-block radius who might be useful or pleasant or both. Within 2 weeks, I had a regular breakfast spot, a turo place on a side street where a woman named 8 Nilda served tapsalog at 7 a.m. for 65 pesos, which is a little over $1, and always added an extra piece of longanisa without comment if she thought you looked like you needed it. I was her best customer within a week. I was her friend within 2. The building had 5 tenants besides me, 2 Filipino families, an elderly couple named Mang Romy and Aling Nina, who had lived there for 20 years and treated the building like a parish they were responsible for, a young German man named Klaus, who was teaching English at a local school, and a recently widowed woman from Dumaguete named Rosario, who had moved to be closer to her grandchildren and spent every afternoon on the second-floor landing doing absolutely nothing visible while managing to know everything that happened in the building before anyone else. Mang Romy knocked on my door on my 3rd morning with a plate of bibingka still hot from what he assured me was a nearby carinderia and not something he had made himself, though I later found out from Aling Nina that he had in fact made it himself and had been up since 5 a.m. to do so, because, she said, in the particular tone of a woman married 53 years, he can never just say welcome like a normal person. The cost of my life, broken down by month, in those first months. Rent, 18 pesos. Electric and water, approximately 200 pesos, higher in peak summer months with the air conditioning. Internet, 500 pesos for a fiber line that was faster than what I'd had in Dayton and cost a quarter of the price. Groceries from the Palenque and the small supermarket around the corner, 6,070 pesos per month. Occasional eating out, 500 pesos. Transportation, tricycles, the occasional grab car, dodong whenever I needed something further, 0 pesos. Medications, which I have taken for blood pressure and hypothyroid for 8 years. Filled at a pharmacy on Laxon Street for 800 pesos per month, compared to $89 with my insurance in Ohio. Total, approximately $622 per month. I had not lived on $622 a month since 1986. The difference between that number and my retirement income stayed in a Philippine bank account and accumulated with a kind of satisfying, quiet persistence. But numbers, as I've learned, are the skeleton. They hold things up, but they are not the living part. The living part was a boy named Benjo. He was 8 years old, the grandson of Aling Nina, and he came to visit on weekends and spent those visits conducting what I can only describe as an anthropological investigation of my apartment. He was interested, specifically, in my nursing textbooks, which I had brought 2 of out of pure sentimentality, and which he treated like artifacts of some vanished civilization. He could not read the medical terminology, but he studied the diagrams with the concentration of someone who fully intended to understand them before he died. I started explaining things to him. Just simply, what the heart does, why we sneeze, what a bone looks like versus a joint. He absorbed everything and then disappeared for a week and came back with 17 follow-up questions written in a school notebook in handwriting that was trying very hard to be legible. His grandmother watched from the doorway and said nothing, but she looked at me the way Aling Feli at the Palenque looked at me when she put the good papaya aside, like I had been expected. I had been in Bacolod for 4 months when a man named Arturo Villanueva knocked on my door. He had been referred to me, or so he said, by someone in the expat Facebook group, and he was looking to sell a condominium unit that he said belonged to his family, in a small complex near the Bacolod North Reclamation area. He had a brochure, glossy and professional, with renderings of a modern building and a promised view of the Visayan Sea. He had a price. 8 million pesos, roughly $50, 0. A significant sum, but not an impossible one for an American retiree with savings. He had, he said, a title. He showed me a photocopy. I will tell you what I know about myself at 68 years old. I am not naive, but I am trusting, which is a different thing, and sometimes more dangerous. I liked his face. He reminded me slightly of Dodong. Same easy warmth, same unhurried manner. I took the brochure. I told him I would think about it. That evening I was having coffee with Ernie Kowalczyk at our Standing Tuesday arrangement at the cafe on Laxon, and I mentioned the visit. Ernie put down his cup. "Did you say North Reclamation area?" he said. "Near there, yes. That entire area," Ernie said, "has been under a property dispute for 4 years. Title irregularities going back to the 80s. I know 3 expats who've been burned on transactions near that zone." He paused. "The photocopy of the title, did you notice the TCT number?" I had not noticed the TCT number. I had noticed the face. The next morning I called Addie Castillo in her capacity as my Philippine legal counsel and read her the number from the photocopy. She confirmed within 2 hours. The transfer certificate of title did not match the property address. The registered owner of that unit was not Arturo Villanueva. He was, in the most charitable interpretation, representing someone who had no legal right to sell. In the least charitable interpretation, and Addie Castillo used this phrase. He was a professional scammer who targeted foreign retirees who hadn't yet learned to check the register of deeds. I sat with this information for a day. Then I made the mistake of calling Renata to tell her, because I thought she should know and because I am, after all, her mother, and some instinct toward transparency prevails even when you know the conversation is going to go badly. "Mom," Renata said, "oh my God, you almost got scammed out of $50,000. I didn't almost get scammed, I said. I showed the paperwork to a lawyer. The system worked. The system, she stopped. I could hear her breathing. Mom, this is exactly what we were worried about. You're over there alone, and there are people who are targeting you because you're an American. There are people who target Americans in Dayton, I said. I got a call last year from someone claiming to be from Medicare who wanted my Social Security number. I didn't give it to them. I didn't move back to Springfield. It's not the same, Renata. I waited. I'm not coming home. I handled this. If you need a moment to be scared on my behalf, take one. But I need you to trust that I am still the same woman who managed a school clinic for 31 years and knew which children needed help and which just needed to be told they were fine. Philip called the next day. His call was shorter and ended with him saying, in a tone that cost him something, "Okay, I'm glad you had the lawyer. I mean it." What I didn't tell either of them, what I have only recently begun to talk about, is that the evening after I got Addie, Castillo's confirmation, I sat on my terrace and cried. Not because I had nearly been scammed, because the encounter had cracked open something I'd been keeping sealed. The small, cold fear that lives in the chest of every person who has made a large, irreversible decision. The fear that says, what if they were right? What if I am too old? What if I don't belong here? What if the warm feeling I've been living in these 4 months is not community but just novelty? And the novelty is about to wear off. It was Mang Romy who found me. He came up to ask if I had a spare extension cord, a perfectly practical request, and found me on the terrace in a state I will describe as dignified distress. He sat down in the other chair, the one I kept for guests, and he looked at the sunset for a long while without saying anything. Then he said, in Ilongo-flavored English that was as natural to him as breathing, "You know why they call Bacolod the City of Smiles?" "I've heard a few versions," I said. "The real reason," he said, "is not the festival, not the mascara. The real reason is, here, when you smile at a stranger, the stranger smiles back. Not because they are polite, because it costs them nothing and gives them something. This is how we are." He looked at me. "You are part of this now, Miss Carroll. The man who tried to cheat you, he is not Bacolod. He is just a man. The city is 8 Nilda, is Jerome, is the Palenque woman who keeps your good papaya. Okay?" "Okay," I said. He nodded, collected the extension cord I found for him, and went back downstairs. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Philip came first. His wife Linda could not get the time off work, so he came alone, in September, carrying 2 suitcases I had not asked for and a deep, visible reluctance I had entirely expected. I met him at the Bacolod Sile International Airport, and I watched his face cycle through a sequence of expressions on the drive with Dodong from the airport to my building, wariness, then surprise, then something more complicated as we turned into the neighborhood and passed 8 Nilda's Turo Turo with the red plastic chairs and the handwritten menu on the wall. "That's where you eat breakfast," I said. "Every day?" "Most days," I said. 65 pesos. That's about $1.15. $1.15. For a full plate," I said. "Eggs, rice, longanisa. She gives me extra if she thinks I look tired." He didn't say anything for the rest of the drive. I had planned the week carefully, not as a sales pitch, but as a full accounting. I didn't hide anything. I took him to the Palenque with its noise and its smells and its particular morning chaos. I showed him Riverside Medical Center and the pharmacy on Laxon with my printout of what I paid versus what I had paid in Dayton. I took him to dinner at a boy's, where the chicken in Azel arrived on a banana leaf still sizzling, and he ate it with his hands because there is no other respectful way to eat chicken and azel at a boy's. And I watched him, this 58-year-old son of mine, figure out something in real time. On the fourth day, Benjo came for his Saturday visit. He arrived with his school notebook and his 17 questions and found a man he didn't know sitting in my kitchen. He stopped in the doorway with the wariness of an 8-year-old who is deciding whether this situation is safe. "This is Philip," I said. "My son. He came from America." Benjo considered this. Then he said to Philip, "You know about the heart?" Miss Carroll showed me the picture. The valves. Philip looked at me. Then he looked at Benjo. "A little," he said. "She's the nurse. I just sold cars." Benjo climbed into the chair across from Philip and opened his notebook. "Okay," he said. "She explained the valves, but I don't understand why the blood goes this direction and not the other direction. Can you ask her?" And so I spent an hour at my kitchen table in Bacolod explaining blood flow to an 8-year-old while my son watched, and at some point I stopped thinking about the explanation and started watching Philip instead. He had his hands around a mug of coffee, and he was very still in the way a person is still when they are actually seeing something, not just looking at it. On the last evening, we sat on the terrace. The fan was turning above us. The neighborhood was doing its evening settling. Same sounds I'd learned to love. Children, televisions, roosters failing at time management. Philip said, "I thought you were running away." "I know," I said. "But you're not. You're just here. You're just living." "Yes. I thought you'd fall apart without us." He said it quietly, and I knew it cost him something honest to say it. "Without the family around, I thought you'd be lonely and scared and you'd call me asking to come home. And instead," he exhaled, "instead you know everybody's name, the market lady, the kid, the man downstairs who makes bibinka. You know them all. And they." He paused. "They know you. Not like they're being nice to the foreign lady. Like they actually know you." "That's what community is," I said. "It's not a place. It's what happens when you stay." He flew back to Dayton on a Tuesday morning, and he was quiet in the car on the way to the airport. At the terminal, before he went through security, he hugged me for a long time, longer than we usually do, and he said into my shoulder, "I was wrong about what you needed. I assumed you needed proximity, and that was about me, not you." That is the most honest thing my son has ever said to me. I have kept it like the calamansi at the Palenque, small, tart, necessary. Renata came 3 months later, in December, during the Festival of Lights season when Bacolod's streets were strung with lanterns, and the evenings smelled of roasted corn from the carts on the boulevard. She came, I think, ready to be unconvinced. She left after 8 days having eaten more chicken and azel than is technically advisable, having bought 3 pairs of hand-embroidered juicy fabric from a market vendor named Aling Ligaya, who spent 45 minutes telling Renata the history of Negren's textile tradition in a mixture of English and Ilongo, while refusing to let her leave without a free pair of earrings, and having sat across from me on this terrace in near silence for an entire sunset, which is the most comfortable silence Renata and I have shared in 15 years. She did not apologize in words. What she said was, "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you're in the right size," she said. "Like before you were wearing something that didn't fit, and we all just got used to seeing you that way." That is not nothing. I have been in Bacolod for 14 months now. Let me give you the honest accounting. What I miss: the particular smell of an Ohio October, which is burning leaves and cold mud, and something you only know if you grew up there. I miss being able to drive. I miss Diane, who has visited my Facebook feed with cheerful regularity and has promised to come see me once I work up the nerve, and I believe her, at least partly. I miss the specific texture of a Frisch's Big Boy, and I am not embarrassed to admit that. I miss proximity to Philip and Renata. Not the daily proximity we never actually had, but the theoretical proximity, the knowledge that they could reach me quickly if they needed to. That knowledge has a weight I underestimated. What I have gained $700 a month of surplus income that goes into a savings account and makes me, for the first time in my adult life, financially comfortable rather than financially adequate. I have gained a community that knows my name, which sounds small until you've spent 3 years being invisible in a suburb where you are your husband's wife and nothing else. I have gained a functional and comprehensive healthcare situation at a fraction of the cost. I have gained the distinct and undervalued pleasure of being noticed, not for what I produce or who I'm attached to, but simply as myself, Carol Ann Whitfield, the American woman on the 4th floor who knows about the heart valves and likes her Salibat strong, and always buys the whole papaya, never just half. My current monthly expenditure, $618. My retirement income, $1.840. The difference, $1.222 saved every single month. In 14 months, that's over $17, zero set aside, more than I've saved in any comparable period of my working life. My SRRV is active. My health is good, checked every 6 months at Riverside by the thorough doctor who still gives me 40 minutes and costs me $9. Jerome renewed my lease through next year. Benjo has moved on from blood flow to the digestive system and has theories about the pancreas that I need to evaluate carefully before encouraging further. Some mornings I sit on this terrace, the same rattan chair, the same fan turning overhead, the same ginger tea warming my hands, and I think about the woman in that waiting room in Dayton. Mustard yellow carpet. A brochure with a circled address. I think about her a lot. I'd like to sit across from her the way I sometimes sit with Benjo, patiently, with the specific kind of patience that comes from having time, which is the rarest luxury I have ever had, and I'd like to say, you are not confused. You are not diminished. The life they are trying to fit you into is the wrong size, and you know it even if you don't have words for it yet. Give yourself permission to find the right one. I don't know the ending of the Gary story yet. The divorce is proceeding, civilly, through lawyers in Ohio. I don't hold bitterness toward him. Not much, anyway. Some days more than others, which is probably correct. We became wrong for each other over a long time. And then he made a choice that clarified everything. I am grateful, in the strange arithmetic of late life, for the clarity. What I know is this. At 68 years old, I moved to a city in the Philippines I had never heard of before a woman in a physical therapy waiting room showed me photos on her phone. I left a marriage that had become a management system. I built a life in a neighborhood where an old man wakes up at 5 in the morning to make me welcome, and an 8-year-old boy brings me his questions in a notebook, and a market vendor sets aside the best fruit before I arrive. I did not escape to the Philippines. I arrived. The distance between those two words is everything. If any part of this story is sitting with you, if something in you recognized something I said, and you've been carrying it around for a while now, I'd really love to hear about it in the comments. This community of people figuring out the second chapter, the unexpected chapter, the chapter nobody gave us a map for, you are why I keep talking. Hit like if this reached you. Subscribe if you want to hear what comes next. I'll be right here, with the fan turning and the tea getting cold and Benjo almost certainly going to knock on that door with more pancreas questions before noon. Thank you for spending time with me today. Take good care of yourselves.